Dr. Justin Marcagiani here. Welcome to Beyond Wellness Radio. We get a fabulous guest here, Jeff Chilton, who is a mushroom expert. Today's talk's all going to be about medicinal mushrooms, the ins, the outs, how they can improve your health. Jeff, welcome to the show. How we doing?
Hey, Justin, thank you so much for having me. Doing fine.
Excellent. Well, let's dive in. Tell the listeners about kind of your background. How did you even get into the mushroom industry? You've been doing it for a while. And what brought you here today?
Well, you know what? I'm born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, forests, rivers, lots of water, and in the fall it rains a lot. And so it's one of the best places in the world for wild mushrooms. And so when I went to university, I had an interest in mushrooms, so I studied mycology, but my major was anthropology. And through anthropology, I studied all about the use of mushrooms as food, as medicine, and in shamanism. But when university was over, it's like, how do you get a job in anthropology,
Yeah,
right?
you make some money now. Exactly.
So I thought, well, I'd love to learn how to grow mushrooms. And it turns out that there was only one mushroom farm in Washington State, and it was 60 miles down the road from Seattle. I went down, I ended up getting a job, and I was there for the next 10 years, literally living with mushrooms.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
And so when you started out this process, did you kind of have to learn the ins and outs of like how to farm them, how to raise them, how to grow them? Like, how did that process kind of unfold? Did you have to study from some really, key mentors in this industry, or did it just kind of naturally happen organically on your own?
Well, this was a very large farm, and we were growing 2 million pounds of mushrooms every year. I mean,
Wow.
there was 200 employees, and
Wow.
so I just started out at the bottom of this, and there were a couple of mushroom growers there who were the head growers of this operation and managers, and I essentially was kind of like an apprentice to them. So over the next 10 years, I made my way up to being the production manager, and again, I mean, just think about this every day, every single crop, and we've got like these crops in rotations.
Wow.
Justin, I'm seeing 200 crops of mushrooms
Wow.
every year, 200 crops. Think about a normal farmer and how many crops that normal farmer is going to see.
That's amazing. So you started out, what were your favorite mushrooms to grow off the bat? So obviously you may have some personal preference based off of what you take or what works the best on your physiology, what allows you to feel the best. What are your favorite ones off the bat for you?
Well, first of all, again, we're growing agaricus mushrooms, and that's all we really had to eat at the time, other than wild mushrooms. But while I was there, we had a Japanese scientist who was growing oyster mushrooms, enoki mushrooms, and shiitake mushrooms.
Okay.
And man, have you ever eaten shiitake mushrooms?
I have, yes.
They're delicious.
They're
They're
amazing.
they're absolutely my favorite mushroom. And not only are they excellent in terms of just eating and nutritionally, but medicinally they're really solid. So like shiitake mushrooms are one of those food as medicine type
Hmm.
foods.
Oh yeah, really big immune booster. So what are your favorite ones? So in practice, I clinically use reishi, maitake, shiitake, cordyceps. You have lion's mane, turkey tail. Those are some of the more common medicinal mushrooms. Do you have any specific favorites that you've used clinically or that you've seen in general?
Well, you know what my favorite is actually reishi mushroom, because
Hmm.
reishi mushroom, with medicinal mushrooms, the key compound of medicinal mushroom is called a beta glucan.
Yeah.
And this beta glucan is what activates our immune system. So it's a potentiator, something that strengthens our immunity. All mushrooms have these beta glucans, even just edible mushrooms that
Oh,
we don't
really?
think of as medicinal mushrooms. Yeah, because the beta glucan makes up half of the cell wall of mushrooms. And
Interesting.
so all mushrooms will have that, but medicinal mushrooms, the top medicinal mushrooms, have a very specific architecture of that beta glucan that makes them active compared to the others. Reishi has probably the largest amount of beta glucans, that one and turkey tail, in all of our analyses. And we analyze every single batch of product that we make. Reishi's got one of the highest levels of beta glucans, but it also has these compounds called triterpenoids, and those are the bitter compounds. So
Yes.
it's kind of like reishi is medicinal mushroom plus. And that's the one, if you're in Asia or something, I mean, it's the mushroom of immortality. They've got stories about it. I mean, it's just really well known.
Yeah. And we won't go into exact companies, but I've been told by a couple of different mushroom experts that you want a triterpene kind of extract about 15% or so in the medicinal mushroom extracts to kind of have a level of clinical potency. Is there a percent regarding the triterpenes that people should look for, or an amount regarding the 1,3
Well,
beta
I
glucan?
mean, they don't get as high as 15% unless you're really trying to build them up. But just in general, they would be somewhere around 4%.
Okay.
And the trouble with just even giving a percentage is that there's no companies or very few labs that can actually analyze for triterpenes, but we can analyze for beta glucans. So what you really want to do with any mushroom product, doesn't matter what it is,
Hmm.
look for an analysis of the beta glucans. And here's a little key and a trick is that it used to be that everybody would say, oh, our product has X amount of polysaccharides. Okay. Well, the problem with that, and beta glucan is a polysaccharide. So everybody
Exactly.
would think, okay, yeah, we've got lots of polysaccharides, lots of beta glucans. The problem is that polysaccharides are actually the starches, and so many extracts out there of whatever kind come on starch carriers. So in some cases, when we analyzed mushroom products, the level of starch was as much as 60%.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
That's really good.
wow. Yeah,
That's really interesting. So you want to actually look at the certificate for the beta glucans, not the polysaccharides. That's
absolutely.
great.
If a company is just talking about polysaccharides, they're hiding something. And, we consider polysaccharide analysis for mushrooms to be absolutely useless. And we've
Got it.
we've demonstrated that through our testing.
That's great. And then obviously the quality, making sure there's no other, heavy metals or junk like that, pesticides. Are mushrooms generally grown organically, or is there typically pesticides that may be given on a conventional kind of farming
Well,
system?
you know what? There's a lot of mushrooms. Probably the majority of mushrooms grown out there have pesticide use going on. It's gotten much better. Certainly, when I was at the mushroom farm in the 1970s, Justin, we had an actual program where it was like on this day you spray this chemical,
Wow.
a month down the line you spray this chemical. I mean, it was a program for growing mushrooms and using pesticides and fungicides. Today, in the industry in the United States, they use a lot less than they used to, but still, if you have the ability, you want to be looking for an organically certified mushroom. I mean, and all our products are certified organic, and to me, that's really important.
Got it. And we'll go over your stuff at the end here, but I'll drop your website, realmushrooms.com. Realmushrooms.com. Great products there. Also, let's kind of just back up a little bit. So we talked about some of the beta glucan, the 1,3 beta glucan. We talked about the triterpenes. I may be mispronouncing it for the last decade
That's
or so,
okay. It
but
doesn't matter.
okay, tomato, tomato, right? It works. So are those the big kind of medicinal compounds that are active in mushrooms, or is there another like hidden compound we don't know about yet?
Well, there are a couple of those, but and what I want to emphasize here is, look, what scientists do out there when they look at any natural product is they fractionate it and fractionate it and
Mhm.
fractionate it because they're looking for the latest new drug. So,
Right.
so a person could say, "Oh, there are hundreds of compounds in mushrooms, and they all help in the activity." You know what? Um, that may be true, but some of those compounds are going to only be there in minute amounts, and that's just part of drug discovery because they find all these different compounds. So really, what I focus on is, look, there are certain compounds that occur in measurable amounts. They define this category like the beta glucan, and those are the ones that we can actually measure and use as markers for quality. So that's really important. One compound that I want to reveal to you right now that
Yeah.
is are in mushrooms and not in too many other things. It's a compound called ergothioneine. Have you ever heard of ergothioneine?
Ergothioneine, I have not. Can you talk about some of what that is and what the benefits are?
Well, ergothioneine is a compound. It's actually an amino acid that they have found in a number of areas in our body, and they're going, we don't produce it. What's it doing there, and why is
Mhm,
it
mhm.
concentrated in areas where there's high oxidative stress? And
Mm.
then they've done a lot of studies with it, and they indicate that it's a very powerful antioxidant. in fact, it's something that they're thinking might even be a new vitamin.
Oh, wow.
And
Ergothioneine.
mushrooms
Interesting.
are one of the foods that contain high amounts of ergothioneine, to the point where we now analyze every single product that we've got for ergothioneine to establish a baseline and just to see, okay, how much of this do we have in our mushrooms? So ergothioneine is one of those kind of special compounds. We also analyze for a compound called ergosterol. Ergosterol is the fungal sterol like
Mhm.
our cholesterol.
Yep.
It's in all fungi, all mushrooms, and it is something that also has medicinal benefits, and we can measure it as well. It's something that has got some direct, basically anti-tumor activities. It's something that plant phytosterols are something that is very beneficial for us. So that's another compound that we can measure and use it as a measure for quality. And that's really the key for what we do. We don't try to build up anything in our products. We just want to have the profile that you expect to find in a dried mushroom. That's what we're looking for. So
Okay.
anytime we do an extract, we want to match it up on that profile.
That's great. Okay, so we have the ergosterol there. Let's talk about some of the beta glucans. What are they doing to your immune cells? I mean, I've seen some studies. They're helping to increase natural killer cells. They're some of the triterpenes are deactivating viruses. What do you know based on your experience and your research you've done? What's it doing to your immune system? How is it helping your body?
Well, these beta glucans, we actually have receptors for
Hmm.
beta glucans, and these receptors are down in our lower intestines. They're down there, and so what happens? The beta glucans come down. They will lock into these receptor sites, and then they will actually then uh, potentiate or essentially strengthen any immune response and create more immune cells like NK cells, like macrophages, like T cells. So that's really where they essentially are going to help boost our immunity. And what they're considered is they're considered a immune modulator. So they're basically
Interesting.
sitting there. They're a potentiator. So they will essentially strengthen our immune response to whether it would be viruses or bacteria, other fungi. They're there to essentially assist us. And the way I look at that activity is preventive. I really see that as something that is in fact, we can be taking them all the time, and they're just sitting in the background helping us out as we're coping with all of these different stresses that come in, whether it be from
Interesting.
bacteria or whatever it is.
Is in functional medicine, kind of where I'm practicing with my patients, we're testing their stress response. We're looking at their adrenals and their cortisol rhythm. And one of the herbs I've used clinically for a very long time are various adaptogenic herbs, like ashwagandha is one of my favorite right here. And it seems to me, based on some of the data, that some of these medicinal mushrooms actually have an adaptogenic like effect, whether it's buffering stress or buffering the immune response. What's your take on that?
Oh, I think they're in fact considered to be adaptogens, and I would call
Hmm.
them premier adaptogens, especially something like reishi. I mean, absolutely. I mean, an adaptogen really is something that tries to keep us in homeostasis.
Hmm.
It's like this whole thing of balance, and that's kind of how
Yes.
I look at health. Is disease is us going out of balance, and so
Hmm.
what we're really trying to do is get back to that homeostasis, back to that state of balance, and they're there to help us. Although there may be other things involved,
Hmm.
of course, like health is not just that simple. But again, yeah, adaptogen is something that will help us to mitigate those stresses that we have, whatever they are, and bring us back into a state of balance. And that to me is kind of like traditional Chinese medicine is all kind of based on that same principle there of balance. And so adaptogens are something that will help us maintain that balance, which essentially means being healthy. I mean, think about it for a second. If you're healthy, do you ever think about your health?
No, you're
It's
able
like,
to adapt. You have a certain level of adaptability. Yeah,
well, and
absolutely.
Yeah, and when you're sick, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, you start thinking about your health and what you have to do to come back into that balance. But when you're healthy, you're just cruising around thinking, yeah, everything is great, it's wonderful.
Yeah, 100%. I know there are various mushrooms like cordyceps, for instance. There's some data they help improve DHEA levels, which is a precursor hormone to a lot of sex hormones, and it's made by the adrenals. And that helps with stress and inflammation. Can you talk more about sex hormone modulation via some of these medicinal mushrooms?
Well, you know what? I know cordyceps has been utilized and is considered to be in that category. Exactly the mechanism, I'm not that certain of the mechanism myself and how it does that, other than I know that it does have an effect on oxygen utilization, which I think
Yep.
could be a big part of that. And I think also we have to be very careful with something. Like I'm not here to tell you, oh yeah, take cordyceps and your your libido will improve or anything like that. I don't know that for a fact. And in some cases, cordyceps even could be considered sort of like a doctrine of signatures kind of herb. You familiar with doctrine of signatures? If
No, no.
something looks like something, then it must be
Oh,
helpful for
right.
that. And
Right.
cordyceps is kind of a little bit phallic shaped. I mean, mushrooms are too,
Right.
but and so it's kind of like okay, um, but I think you know what I think too, and there's a lot of research done with cordyceps and its beta glucans and its those effects. I think anything that can help maintain or boost our immunity is going to have an effect on your basic libido and libidinous health.
I work with a lot of hormone issues, and I strongly recommend not to ever go kind of whole hog or go in on just one thing to be the panacea. You obviously want to make sure you're making diet, lifestyle changes, and you're getting to the root of the underlying issue. And some of these things may be a really good palliative support to kind of to throw in there as an important tool for sure. I agree with that. What about like your natural killer cells? What about these helper cells? What about really stimulating these kind of first, these are yeah, are just our natural killers, which are the guys that are on the grounds
First
first going
responders.
into a exactly first responder to an infection. What herbs or what mushrooms are best for that? What do you know about that?
Well, you know what I mean, if you go out and read the literature, and there is so much data out there on this activity, and look, much of that data and much of that research is in vivo. It's in vitro. We don't have a lot of clinical data on that. So really, that kind of scientific research, I can read it and go, okay, yeah, this is what happens. But going much deeper than that, I mean, I'm not the scientist doing that kind of work. So
We,
I
we just know what
really,
happens. You kind of have the general, outset mechanism of what's happening, essentially.
oh, you know what? There is so much. There's such a big body of research on the effects of beta glucans in these kind of tests. I mean, thousands of papers. I mean, they've been studying beta glucans now for 30 or 40 years. And so that type of activity is something where, I mean, when I looked at that research, I mean, I can only take it so far because I'm not a scientist doing that kind of work. So that's not the kind of thing that I really study too much and don't have a hard time keeping up with it all actually. But the actual mechanisms to me are more important. Okay, actually, what is it
That's
doing?
it. That's
Is
what
it
it's
is
all
it in
about.
fact is it in fact stimulating these immune cells? Well, what do those immune cells do? Well, I'm sure a lot of practitioners like yourself or immunologists are much more capable about going deeper about exactly what they're doing and how they're working.
But just in general, just from that kind of 100 yard stare, we're like looking at it. All right, big picture, we're going back. We know that these compounds are having an effect modulating the immune system, mobilizing some of these natural killer cells. Can you kind of connect the dots based on what you know with medicinal mushrooms and cancer? What's your experience with that? Your experience or in the literature?
Well, first of all, what I would say is, look, medicinal mushrooms are not going to cure anybody's cancer. What they're primarily used for is an adjuvant. In other words, there's something that if you're going through a standard chemotherapy or radiation or something like that, they're going to help your immune system, your body to cope with those two types of protocols, which are tearing down your immunity and making you, sick to some degree. So that's really where they come in. And in terms of folk remedies, I mean, mushrooms have been used as folk remedy for those kind of things, but in terms of actually being a cure per se, I don't look at them in that way at all. I just consider them something that is going to help you to actually cope with this tremendous stress of not only the disease but also with the therapies that science right now or the medical profession is actually using with people. So some of the most well-known drugs actually that have been produced from mushrooms. One is called PSK, and the other is called PSP, and they're produced from turkey tail, and they are not like a just standard mushroom hot water extract or alcohol extract. They're actually have been fractionated down to, and extracted to the point where in Japan PSK is actually considered a drug. And it is prescribed with cancer therapies. So that's and it's not like it's I mean it's helping people. Maybe they're getting a longer life by using that compared to the control groups, but there's a lot of clinical data on that, but it's not something that's given to try and cure anybody. They've got another drug over there called lentinin that is produced from shiitake mushroom. And it is unlike PSK, which is not a pure compound because it's a protein-bound polysaccharide. Lentinin is actually a pure beta-1316 glucan, and it is utilized in the same way, again, not alone, but along with these other therapies. And there's a tremendous body of clinical work behind it to demonstrate that it does alleviate some of the symptoms and also gives people a longer life than they otherwise would have, but not like, significantly going to prolong your life for years and years and years, than what you'd normally have.
And when we talk about cancer, there's never just one. You can't have a cure when there's dozens of different causes. If you're getting exposed to toxins or stress or sleep or low vitamin D or nutrient deficiencies, you can't have just one cure. There's no such thing as a cure if there's dozens of different potential vectors. But there's things that we can do to kind of throw in there to support all the other things that we're doing to bump up our immune response. That's kind of the context of that.
Well, yeah, and I think the other thing that we have to remember is that cancer, in some ways, could be lifestyle related. It could be diet related. People eating the wrong things. I mean, or smoking or drinking or any of those types of drug abuses. I mean, so there's a lot of factors involved, and in a way, the first thing you'd want somebody to do is go, okay, why don't you back off all of that? You probably would prescribe somebody a certain type of diet. You say, you shouldn't be eating this, you shouldn't be drinking that. You need to make some real changes if you want to help the protocols that you're going to give them. And those are the kind of things that are so important. And because if you're looking at something in a holistic way, which I'm sure you are, then that there are so many different factors that you have to deal with.
Yeah, and I consider them to be adaptogen functional medicine tools that are very powerful that we plug in to a comprehensive program. So I like that. What other, let's just say, less notorious things that mushrooms are used for besides the common adaptogenic kind of cancer boosting effects? What else do you see? What else do you recommend for?
Well, what's really interesting is there's a mushroom right now that is just like gotten so popular. It's called lion's mane. You heard of lion's mane at all?
I love lion's mane.
Do you use lion's mane?
My biggies Reishi and cordyceps and maitake and shiitake, but I haven't really been using it too much. But I do have some.
Well, it's pretty interesting because the thing about lion's mane is that we have clinical trials out of Japan where they've actually got like 30 different people around age 70, and then they've got a control group of 30 people, and they feed them 3 grams of lion's mane. They give them a whole battery of tests. 90 days later, they test them again, and what they find is that the people taking the lion's mane do much better. And then they stop taking lion's mane for a month, and now they're back to baseline and the same as the control. So they've got a number of these different clinical tests with lion's mane. Lion's mane actually they've found from their research stimulates the production of what's called nerve growth factor. And nerve growth factor is a protein that essentially helps to maintain and strengthen our neuron production and our neural network. So
Great.
so if you can stimulate the production of this nerve growth factor, because what they find is as you get older, your production of nerve growth factor starts to go down a bit. And so now, I mean, and so they're, you know how it is, they're trying to tie all these things together to find out, okay, why is it that we have this cognitive sort of letdown as we get older, and people's
Hmm.
memories start to, get a little bit wobbly, and they can't remember as well, and then we have dementia and Alzheimer's and all those other things. So the fact that there is actually something like lion's mane, that, let's just call it a nootropic, which is kind of a big
Yeah.
category these
Yeah.
days. You probably heard of it. And
Yeah.
so it's like, oh man, it is just like taken off
And what's
because
that
of that.
compound in lion's mane? Can you say it again?
Well, there's a couple of compounds in lion's mane that
What's the
produce
main
this.
one though?
They're called haricinones,
Harrison.
arenacenes, arenocerins. I mean, this is another one of those things where
Wow.
when you look at the literature, there's probably a couple dozen different, let's just say, analogs of these different compounds that create these effects and will boost this nerve growth factor. And we're at the beginning of researching that, even though it's been used in traditional Chinese medicine for these types of issues for quite a while.
That's very cool. Yeah, when you look at these things, you can have a 20-page study, but if you walk away, what's the bullet point mechanism and what's it doing? And as long as you get that action point, that's the most important thing in my opinion, right? PhD, pile higher and deeper, but you can also just get the key take home action items. So I think that's powerful. So any research on that, connecting improvements in Alzheimer's or any neurodegenerative conditions at all?
Actually, there is. Yeah, they've got a
Yeah.
couple studies on dementia,
Oh, cool.
actually showing that it improves. And also, they have a few studies on depression showing that it improves. And you know what? Listen, it is not easy to get clinical trials with any natural product.
No, it's
And
very difficult. Can't
not only
patent it.
that, to get a good one, because look, I've seen clinical trials done, and you look at them and you go, okay, who sponsored them, and who's doing them? And
Yeah.
unless it's a totally unbiased group, you have to be really careful, like any research. I mean, you have to read the fine print of how this is done and who's actually doing it. So these particular studies are done at Japanese universities.
Yeah.
I like Japanese
It's more
science.
part of their culture. It's part of their
Well,
culture. I love what
that
they do.
that as well, yeah. and
I
and
mean,
so I mean,
I think I was seeing things such as like liver or kidney cancer, like one of the first line therapies over in Japan is some of these medicinal mushrooms. I think it was Reishi or cordyceps is like first line in Japan for liver cancer.
wow. Well, what's interesting about you saying that is that I was at a conference in China in the mid '90s, and it was a Ganodermis, a Reishi conference, and there was a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner there, older man, maybe he's in his 50s or something like that. And I was talking to him, and he said his number one herb for the liver was Reishi.
Yeah. Yep. I've
And
seen some
he at
studies on it.
times he said he would use as much as 30 dried grams of reishi
Yeah.
in his treatments. And one of the things that's interesting about traditional Chinese medicine is that when they're using their herbal formulas, it's strong, it's powerful, they put a lot in there, they want to see something happen. It's not like supplements. What do supplements tell you to take? I mean, they tell you to take what, 2 capsules a day? Doesn't matter whether you're 150 pounds or 250 pounds, they're telling you 2 capsules a day. It's like, come on, let's get real here.
That well, 30 grams is significant. In the capsule, the average Reishi is 500 milligrams a capsule.
Well,
So yeah,
and of
it's
course,
60 capsules a day.
this is 30 grams of dried mushrooms. So let's just say if you were to do a 10-to-1 extract, you could get it down to 3 grams of extract or something like that,
Yes,
which still
exactly.
would be quite a lot. I mean, so in other words, he's just basically saying, look, we use a lot, we use a high dose,
Very
and for
therapeutic.
us, it's the main herb that we use for liver problems. And I thought,
Amazing.
man, And that's where the triterpenes come in. They've got a lot of data
Triterpenes, love them.
on triterpenoids with the liver.
And I know some of the mechanisms in regards to, I'll still call them triterpenes. I'm nostalgic. Is they deactivate viruses. Any feedback on that? What do you know about the deactivation of viruses? How does that happen? Is it just like binding to it and then making the virus less pathogenic?
That's really interesting. I couldn't really answer that question. That's for a virologist. This is the thing. It's like you get into all of that research, and I can read a paper and maybe, especially these days, a week later, I've forgotten the whole thing. I mean, whereas the research that I do myself and the research that we do in my company, I can go into that in great detail and what we've done there. But in terms of this other stuff, yeah, I can read it. But you know what it's like? It's just like if you want to write a paper on something, you pull together all this research, you spend months dealing with it, working
Yeah.
with it, putting it into the shape that you want it in. And by the end of it, you're an expert, right? And you know it backwards and forwards. It's like, but man, I can't do that anymore with a lot of that research because I'm busy doing other things.
Makes sense. All the listeners have to know that there's mechanisms out there and it can provide that benefit. That's great. If you have anything to any value you want to add to it above and beyond based on your experience, that's great. But you kind of said a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. You talked about a lot of the pharmaceutical research in some of these mushrooms or these kind of compounds or isomers within mushrooms. You see a lot of that with turmeric or curcumin as well. It seems like big pharma's trying to find this active compound and isolate it. Now, we know just with natural compounds in general, you can't really patent them unless you can find something and then twist it around a little bit and make it so it's not found in nature, and then you can patent it. So if someone comes in and says, hey, reishi mushroom has this amazing benefit, let's put $100 million into this, to these studies, and you see this great benefit, guess what? You can't get the ROI on your investment because everyone can now sell reishi because there's no patent. So you get companies that are in there trying to make a drug out of it by tweaking it a little bit.
That's absolutely right, and that's where these particular products like lentinin, it's a patented
Yep.
product. I mean, because it's actually a drug, and it is like they pulled out this one very specific beta glucan from that
Yes.
mushroom, and so that's what they've got, a pure compound. And you know, in what I do, and certainly in the general, let's just say, supplement industry or herbal medicine space, I mean, I believe that any of these natural products, there's multiple components there all working together, and to try and build one up or split one off or anything like that, it kind of is not the way that a traditional herbalist or the way we would like to see these natural products used. We want to see the whole herb used, and certainly we can concentrate them into an extract, because it's like going, how am I going to take 30 grams of reishi? Right? It's like you're
Oh
certainly
yeah.
not going to want to just eat it anyway. You might want to boil it down into tea, and then you could drink it. Okay, but again, supplement makers, their powders, nobody's going to say, okay, yeah, take 10 capsules of this particular product. They want to have a concentrate. When we make concentrates, we want to make sure that the profile is similar to what the raw material has, because we believe that all of those compounds that are in there need to be in there and should be in there for this to work the way it's supposed to work.
I think that's really, really important. That's good. So when you talk about, I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around this here. So when we talk about some of these compounds, like you mentioned, the whole mushroom has a lot of other antioxidant and other beneficial properties that kind of work in synergy. So when you just pull one compound out, you're missing that beautiful matrix that was encapsulating it. So that totally makes sense. I get that. And what's your take on dosing in general? And I know that may be different from reishi to lion's mane to cordyceps. Is there a general dosing structure that you like to adhere to based on weight or certain conditions?
Well, you know what? I've got a physician friend who was originally from Hong Kong, where he studied traditional Chinese medicine, but then he became an MD. He practices in New York. In 1992, he wrote a paper on the proper dose for a reishi mushroom, and he went back and he looked at all of the traditional literature, everything he can find, and he came up and he said, look, a common dose for that would be a 2 to 5 dried grams of the mushroom or extract equivalent. So if you were like, okay, I've got a 5 grams, if I do a 10-to-1 extract, that means I could do 500 milligrams as a daily dose. And so I use that kind of as my guideline for all of the mushrooms. I say, look, 2 to 5 dried grams or equivalent in terms of an extract. And the other thing that we can do too, which is really great, is when we have these clinical trials, for example, with lion's mane, these clinical trials are based on 3 dried grams of just lion's mane powder. My God, that is not hardly anything really when you think about it. And just to give you an idea, okay, 3 dried grams. A normal mushroom is 90% water. So what that means is 30 grams of fresh lion's mane. That would be like one lion's mane, one small lion's mane that you would eat. So 3 dried grams is not a lot, and yet they were getting these benefits from that. And my thing is, I kind of like, and I've got friends in the herbal industry that have been there a long time making extracts and all that. One of my friends is like, I want my extracts to be strong enough that when somebody takes it, they're going to feel something. And I think that's kind of interesting because, that's what, in a sense, the traditional Chinese practitioners are sort of doing when they're giving people higher doses of these things. They're like, we want to see something happen. We want to see people feel this. We want to see some benefits right away. We don't want to low dose people and yeah, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. So and look, I don't want to get too much into dosing because I'm not a practitioner. I'm not on the front lines at all. So that's something where someone like yourself or others would, if you're in clinical practice, you would see that, you would see the effects. I don't get that kind of feedback so much, but I really think that it doesn't matter what it is, you have to take enough of it to get the benefits.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been actually doing 3 to 5 grams in general for a very long time. So usually 500 milligram capsule, doing 6. And then if I'm acute, when I'm sick, I'm up to 12 capsules, 6 grams a day. So I've seen that to be very, very therapeutic. That's excellent. And so when we're looking at mushrooms, we won't go into specific brands. What are the things we should look for to assess potency? What things we should look for in the back of the label? What should we taste for? You talked about reishi kind of tasting bitter earlier. How can someone look on the back of a label and assess what's going on?
Well, one of the things as a mushroom grower, I know the economics of growing mushrooms. I mean, I was on that big farm. I had a small farm myself for a while. I know what the economics are. If you grow mushrooms, you can grow them fresh, take them to the market, you can make a living. But the fact of the matter is that as supplements, we're dealing with a dry powder. Mushrooms are 90% water. So the issue is that if you can get $5 as a grower for that pound of fresh mushrooms, if you dry it out, now you have to get $50 for that same pound of dried mushrooms. And in terms of the supplement industry, the economics don't work. I realized that very early on. And so that's why I spent a lot of time in China in the 90s working with growers and working with processors. And in 1997, I went to China with OCIA, which is a large organic certification organization, and we held the first workshop for organic certification of mushrooms in China, 1997. So that's where we grow and process all of our mushrooms. But in the United States, what companies do, there's not a single company in the United States that grows a mushroom and sells that as a supplement, unless they're a small little farm selling their own supplements and growing their own mushrooms. But in terms of the industry in general, it doesn't happen because it's not economically viable. So what happens is in the United States, we've got big companies producing mycelium, which is the vegetative stage of this organism that we call a mushroom. And they put this mycelium on sterilized grain. They grow it out on the grain, and then at the end of the process, they harvest it all, dry it, grind it to a powder, grain and all. So one of the things that I did is in 2015 is I did a big study with 95 different samples, 40 of which I bought off the internet, and they were all these myceliated grain products. We tested them for beta glucans, and the test also allowed us to test for alpha glucans, which are starches. Mushrooms don't have starch. So what we found was all of these US grown products were very low in beta glucans, like around 5%, very high in alpha glucan, which is the starch, 30 to 60%. To me, that was obvious because they're grown on grain and the grain's not taken out of the product. A mushroom should be 25 to 50% beta glucan, and there should be no starch and maybe 1 or 2% worth of glycogen. So it was just all these products were just the exact opposite of what you want to get in a mushroom product. Well, it turns out that those products right now dominate the market. And a lot of companies don't even tell you that you're not actually getting a true mushroom product. Some companies do. If you look at the supplements facts, some of them will say mycelium, and then in the other, they will say myceliated grain of some sort, oats or rice or something like this. But other companies who buy those raw materials, they're being sold to those companies as mushroom.
So
and
what's
even
a
the
fruiting
companies
body?
that,
What's a fruiting body versus the
well,
actual
okay, a fruiting body is a mushroom.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And so, whereas just quickly, mushrooms don't have seeds, they have spores. The
Right.
spore out in nature germinates into a very fine filament. Multiple filaments come together and form a network. That network is called mycelium. That is the vegetative body of this organism. The
Mm-hmm.
mushroom that comes up from that mycelium, that vegetative body, produces a fruiting body that we call a mushroom. So this vegetative mycelium, you can take that and you grow it out in a laboratory, and actually that's what they use as seed to grow mushrooms. But instead of actually using it as seed, they will grow it out. These companies will grow it out on the grain. It's sterile. They'll grind it to a powder. Do you know what tempeh is?
Yep. Type of soy.
It's tempeh.
Fermented soy. Yep.
Yeah, I mean it's cooked soybean with fungal mycelium.
Ah,
So
interesting.
you're
Okay.
actually eating mycelium. It's a great food. And that's what these products are, is they're actually tempeh disguised as a nutritional supplement.
So how could people find the real deal then? If we're going to look and some of these companies aren't saying it's mycelium fruiting bodies, what other resources can people utilize to know what's really going on with their mushrooms?
Well, a couple things. One of which is if it says made in the USA, forget it. It's one of these myceliated grain products.
Got it.
Number two, look, pour it out, taste it. We were talking earlier about reishi, right? Pour out your reishi capsule and taste it. If it tastes bland, it's not reishi. It's one of these grain products.
Good to know.
Reishi's bitter. We used to do what we called the reishi challenge. We'd do that at a trade show, and people would taste one, and then they'd taste the reishi extract, and they go, holy shit, give me some water. This is like, it's like powerfully bitter.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
I'm not kidding you. So it's really crazy. So I mean, Justin, there are ways that we can know. The other way, which is really fun, which I love, and you can use on any of these different products, is you get yourself a little bottle of iodine. You put about 4 capsules in a quarter cup of water. You stir it all up. You put 10 drops of iodine in there. If there's starch in there, it will turn black. Do that with a genuine mushroom product.
Okay, it'll turn black
Mushrooms
if you add
don't have
iodine.
starch in there.
Mm-hmm.
Do that with a genuine mushroom product. The water will turn the color of the iodine, but it won't go black unless, of course, some of for example, some of our mushroom extracts are black already, so it's hard to do a test with them. But some of them are not, and so you can put the drops in, and it won't turn. And that's just another simple test.
Okay, and if people can call up the company and get a certificate analysis regarding what's in there, what should they be looking for again regarding the 1,3,1,1 beta glucan or the triterpenes? What should they be looking at percentage wise?
Well, you know what, for the beta glucans, you should be looking for anywhere. It depends from mushroom to mushroom, but anywhere from like reishi, you should be looking for something over 30%. So you'd be looking for 30 to 50% on your reishi product.
On the beta glucan.
Yes, that's right. So look for beta glucans. If it says polysaccharides, forget it.
Ignore
polysaccharides are meaningless. The other thing too is you can call up the company and say, look, are there any grains in your product? Can you imagine being at Paleo FX
Oh
and
yeah.
having somebody come up to me and they see my, big mushroom thing behind me and say, "Oh, I love mushrooms." And they say, and I say like, "Oh yeah, that's great." And then I ask them what brand they're taking. And I go like, "Oh man, I hate to tell you this, but you're taking a lot of grain powder." And they're just like ready to pull
No.
their hair out, right? Because it's like, I thought I was taking a mushroom product.
And so the best sourcing that you find right now is Japan. Is that kind of where you grow a lot of
No,
your
no, we
mushrooms?
grow everything in China.
I'm
And
sorry, you're in
look,
China.
yeah, and
China
look,
and Cambodia? Where?
no, Cambodia has no,
What was the
China,
second? Oh, so all China. Okay.
all
And then
China.
you kind of harvest it there and then you encapsulate
We
it and then
we
ship it
have
over?
we have contract growers in
Yeah.
China
Like
that
individual
are
farmers, like big farms, or
individual farmers,
how do you
and
source
it's
them out? That must be difficult.
hey, dig this. China produces 85% of the world's mushrooms.
I believe it. It's part of their culture. It's embedded.
It is
Yeah.
85%. I mean, and there are
Yep.
tens of thousands of mushroom growers in China. And I've been there again since the early 90s. I've developed relationships. I have Chinese
That's
partners.
amazing.
They organize the growers for me. We have beautifully brand new factories where we bring the dried mushrooms, we produce our extracts, then we send the bulk powders over, and then they all get, I mean, Namex, which is my company, we sell our raw materials to hundreds of other companies that put them out under their own label.
So with all the tariffs from China, are you getting hit the last year or two?
Oh man, don't even talk to me.
I figured so. I figured so. Okay. Well, you
Yeah.
produce a great product, so you don't have much competition over here, you know?
Well, yeah, that's true. But you know what? The fact of the matter is those products that I'm telling you about, if you look at their front label, it says mushroom. And a lot of
Right.
people are fooled by that. And you turn it over, and only a few of them will say mycelium, and in the others say, myceliated grains of some sort. So unless you're really paying attention, you don't know. And so I'm telling you, those companies have probably 70% of the market out there. And because they've just been doing it for quite a long time, and they keep selling it as mushroom when it's not mushroom. And I've pushed back on that, and they're finally starting to, you know what? There's an FDA compliance document, Justin,
Yeah.
that's been there since 1976, and it says you cannot sell mycelium and call it or infer that it is mushroom.
Hmm. Interesting.
FDA compliance
But a lot of
document.
companies ignore that.
They
Stop
ignore
using
that.
it.
And why? Because look, FDA's got bigger fish to fry, right?
Oh yeah. A lot of other bigger issues. Well, hopefully this information will help educate the listeners. Any feedback at all on psychedelic mushrooms?
Yeah, they're wonderful.
Experience growing them?
How about personal feedback?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. If you have that, that's fine. Do you grow them?
Oh,
Any
well,
feedback
well,
on microdosing or
Well,
therapeutic
look,
dosing?
part of my studies at university back in the 60s was on the use of psychedelic mushrooms. And in the
Yeah, it's the
Pacific
right time
Northwest,
period.
they,
Yeah.
yeah, I know. We actually had them growing in the Pacific Northwest. And also, I spent a year and a half in Mexico in 1971, 72, tracking
Wow.
down people that used them, using them myself. So I'm very familiar with them. And in fact, in 1973, I wrote a book called The Mushroom Cultivator, which is all about growing mushrooms at home. It includes those in there if people are interested. So no, I'm very familiar with them. I think they're tremendously beneficial. I think, not only just like right now, they're using them for end of life issues. People have fear issues about end of life. They're using them for mental illness. People now are using them as a nootropic, taking a microdose, like microdosing with them. You know what? I think ultimately they're going to be revolutionary, as well as evolutionary.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of how long those authorities out there
Yep.
allow it to proceed. Right now, they're allowing the researchers to do their thing, and you know what? I never thought pot would be legal, for God's sakes. I mean, it's like I thought that would always be prohibited, and they'd have this
Right.
prohibition on it. And look at it
Right.
now. I'm like, I don't believe it, and I don't even smoke anymore, but I used to.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So with the psychedelic mushrooms, are there different types, kind of like, in medicinal mushrooms?
Well,
Is
you know
there,
what? There's a genus called psilocybe, which is
yeah,
what
psilocybin, right?
psilocybin is
Yep.
named after. And in that genus, there are dozens and dozens of species, but there's probably about 12 different species that are pretty powerful, reasonably similar in their effects. Some indigenous people look at them of having different qualities, and that's probably likely, but you're going to get somewhat the same type of experience from them. Again, it's really gets down to if you're going to use them, you really need to use the proper set, which
And
is
how's
your
that different
mind
than
has got to
LSD?
be.
How's
What's
that different
that?
than LSD? The
They
psilocybin.
are the what's in there. The actual compound psilocybin is a very different compound from LSD. I mean, LSD is you take it
That's the
in
hard
terms of
drug.
micrograms. I
Right.
mean, micrograms. I mean, small 200 micrograms. Whereas with psilocybin, you'd be taking 1,000 milligrams, 2,000 milligrams. LSD is tremendously powerful.
Far more concentrated.
Well, I guess you could say that, but it's just a different type of compound. It acts in a
Okay.
different way, but it gives you a very somewhat similar experience. And you know what? I have a positive view of that. I don't see anything. Again, like I say, set and setting and doing these things properly is really important.
Got it. Proper setting. Any particular dose or species of the medicinal or the psychedelic mushroom you recommend or you like personally?
Oh, you know what? There's pretty standard information out there. People can find that. The thing about it is right now, if you want to get those mushrooms, I mean, there's like millions of pounds of them grown every year.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, they're everywhere. I mean,
That's crazy.
millions. I'm talking millions of pounds of them being grown out there. It's
That's
like,
crazy. Do they just kind of grow naturally in nature, or do you have to do something
hey,
special to?
hey, you're down in Texas. They actually
Yeah,
grow on the Gulf Coast. They grow in the
that's
cow
amazing.
pastures. Yeah, you can go out there
Wow.
and find them yourself. They're in the cow pastures, and they're not really illegal until you pick them up and put them in your hand.
So how do you differentiate if you're the average person going in and hunting mushrooms, and how do you know a magic mushroom from a regular edible mushroom?
Well, you really have to go with somebody who knows what they're
Who
doing. You
knows?
do not want to pick and eat any mushroom unless you're
Absolutely
absolutely
sure.
certain. You do not. I mean, it's just like, it's not just mushrooms, but plants have poisons too. I mean, it's just common knowledge or common sense that you're not going to pick something and go, "Oh, wow, that looks great. Let's go ahead and eat it," right? And it's like,
Yeah.
no, no,
Any
do
thoughts on the
not.
benefits of microdosing for these magic mushrooms at all versus just regular
Well, you know what?
consumption?
I think it's a really interesting subject, and what people are looking for is a little bit of mental acuity. I mean, think about it for a second. If all of a sudden your eyesight sharpened up a little bit, or all of a sudden your hearing sharpened up a little bit, man, listening to music or something on these is unbelievable. And so people are getting, these sort of like cognitive effects on microdoses where they just feel like they are a little more focused. They feel like things are kind of coming together a little better. And
Hmm.
this is something where we're going to learn a lot more about it as more and more people come out and talk about it, and more people kind of study the experience and see what's going on there. But I think it's an amazingly uh, evolutionary step, and I'm very much very positive about it and very much behind it. I hope it happens. We don't grow and sell those, so, but
Oh,
somebody will. I
rats.
mean,
Yeah, I
there's
know.
already, like I say, there are millions of pounds being grown and sold out there right now. There's so many
That's funny.
growers that you could not even imagine it.
That's great. And then regarding the you said the microdosing, is that going to affect like coordination, or you were kind of describing, is it more as it upregulates some of these things? So it wouldn't affect you driving a vehicle or things like that, or would it still compromise you physically?
Well, you know what? If it on a microdose, you're probably okay, but you're really going to have to know at what level you
Feel it out
don't
first.
want to get to, because certainly nobody should be driving a vehicle when they are too, let's just say, high. That's
Right.
not a good thing to do. It doesn't really matter what substance you happen to be consuming. That's not a good idea. I mean, you know what? Do not, take
Without an
any substance
exception,
and
CYA,
drive.
med legal, but you're saying in some way, you're kind of describing it in some ways that it can upregulate some of these senses, which is interesting.
Well, no, it is very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, I don't know. Have you ever, you know?
I never had that experience with medicinal mushrooms. Yeah, I'd like to at some point, but like you said, the setting's really important.
Yeah, well, you know what? When you do them, and not just even a microdose, but do it at a little bit over the threshold dose, so you're
Yeah.
actually getting the experience, and you go out in a natural setting that you are already familiar with and you really like, you will see and feel things that you've never felt before, and it will really open you up to, I think, one of the most beneficial parts of that, which is the realization that we are all connected.
And then do you
Nature,
combine it at
everything.
all? Do you
What's that?
combine it? Like I know with like ayahuasca, there's certain herbs you combine it with to make the hangover kind of feeling less. Do you combine it with anything to neutralize certain feelings?
No, no, you don't have to combine it
Just
with
straight.
anything. No, just take it just as it is. Yeah, and the beauty of it too is that you can actually get the real thing. I mean, look, back in the '60s, so much of what was going around were like pills, and you're
Right.
like, someone says, "Oh yeah, try this. I had a great experience," and you're like, really, should I try that or not? I mean,
Yeah.
I better know that person very well, and I'm not going to be at a who knows what, a concert or something, and says, here, try this, take it. I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I'll just take that pill. No, it's like, no, 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 no. Be smart about it. Be cognizant about the fact that you want to be in an environment that is supportive and comfortable, and something
Right.
that's not threatening. You don't want to be like, especially at a higher dose, you don't want to be sitting there and somebody's knocking at the door and you're like, who the hell is that? You know,
Right. Exactly. Well, those are
or the
great.
phone rings.
This conversation has taken so many turns. So we talked about the medicinal benefits for your health, for stress, for cancer, and then we talked about the whole magic mushroom section. I think we hit it pretty good. Jeff, is there anything else you want to leave the listeners with? I mean, your website is realmushrooms.com. Great information there. Anything else we haven't quite touched upon that you want to highlight here briefly?
Well, a couple things. One of which is the namex.com is the website for my company, the main company. And what I like to say is we got a lot of information there. So people should go there. We've got a
Can you
ton of
spell that
information.
URL? Namex, Namex?
Nammex.
Nammex. We'll put the links below in the show notes.
That's awesome.
Realmushrooms.com as well. We'll
Yep.
put that
And
below.
the other thing is, look, what I tell people all the time is mushrooms are the forgotten food. They're the ones that are sitting right in between plants and animals, and they're a food that everybody should put those into their diet. They're a great food, high in fiber. They've got these medicinal compounds as well as very nutritious. So get out there, start eating mushrooms, start putting them into your diet. It's really important, and it's a wonderful food as medicine.
What's the mushroom? It's like the real tall, skinny ones that they serve in the steak restaurants. Real tall and
Enoki,
skinny.
the like kind of very light colored.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
Love
enoki.
those.
I love them
Love them.
too. They're
Amazing.
oh yeah. I
With
mean,
some
I
butter
mean,
and
if you buy
salt.
them and bring
Man,
them home and you strip them apart and they're like noodles, you fry them up. They're
unbelievable.
crunchy. Yeah, fabulous,
That's
fabulous.
great.
Yeah, one of my favorites.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing this great intel here. Are there any other questions that you'd love to answer or you're passionate about that I didn't ask you yet that you want to hit?
No, I think we've really covered it really well.
Awesome.
And it was really fun talking to you, and I really enjoyed being here a lot. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much. We'll be back. I look forward to checking in with you down the road. You have a great day. Take
Awesome.
care.
Awesome.
Bye.